because I know you, but nobody else, or I'm assuming nobody else here knows you. Maybe some people do. So maybe you can just give a little bit of background in terms of who you are and what you do and how you got to be where you are at the moment.
Sure. I do recognize a couple of names and one face on the camera that's on. So hi guys that do know me, and I apologize you know this story. But about 10 years ago, I experienced my own stress-related burnout. I'd always known that stress is bad for you. You know, I'd heard it kind of causes heart attacks and strokes, but that was about it. And I went from being a very highly functioning individual in a large organization to essentially not being able to function at all. And I wanted to find out, well, how on earth did this happen to me? You know, I've been to university, I've been to business school, I've been on training courses, how to be a better leader, but nobody told me about this. And that seemed a bit silly, because not only is it unproductive from an organizational perspective, it's fairly devastating from a personal perspective. So I started investigating it. I wrote and published a book about my experiences. I then built some stress management software, the Vital software, with some doctors, really trying to help others like me, I thought, just raise their understanding, raise their stress literacy, because so many of the elements of stress we kind of get used to, and they insidiously creep up on us. So that's really the purpose behind that software. And again, I'm hoping, you know, we all get chance. If those of you who haven't used it, I really do urge you, at the end of the session, we'll put our details up. We'll give you the login details for that software. It's a 5-minute exercise, completely confidential. And it's actually at the moment we're using it as part of a global stress survey. So we're trying to get some data around how stress is manifesting during these strange times. And we're looking to do a research paper and publish it on that. So I do urge you, if you haven't logged in and taken it, please do so, and we'll give those details later on. I was also fortunate enough to go back and study. I was what's ignominiously called a mature student. So I went back and I studied a master's in applied psychology because I wanted to understand more about human behavior, how the environment impacts us, how just the sort of the nuts and bolts, if you like, of the human condition. You know, I'd learned a lot about strategy and finance and marketing and operations management, and you know, how Japanese car manufacturing plants work, which is great and it's very interesting. But I had no concept of the complexities of the human being, and how stress and how it affects us is an integral part of who we are and how we react to the environment around us. So coming out of that, yeah, there was a greater degree of understanding, and then being able to marry up a lot of the elements around that. So I remain very interested in trying to help organizations and specifically individuals just understand where they are from a stress perspective, what they can do about it practically. You know, there's a lot of wonderful theory out there, and it's very interesting. But unless you can turn that theory into something that is practically applicable to yourself in your own life, I don't believe you can get the full benefit out of it. So I try to help people bridge that sort of theory gap. And then I'm also quite involved these days in how do we understand, how do we use the behavior change models that psychology gives us to help people manage their chronic health conditions using technology as well. So yeah, that's quite a lot about me, actually. You're gonna have to time box me, otherwise this hour is going to go past too quickly. I can see some wry smiles from the people who know me.
That's awesome, and I have to apologize. I see for some reason my camera is not playing ball today. I think it's just also stressed out and zoomed out from this online world that we're living in. But so I am here, but for those that don't know me, I know there are a few familiar faces, but for those that don't know me, I am Paula Quinsee. I am a relationship coach and life coach. And I am also very passionate about human behavior and helping people to have healthy relationships, starting with your relationship with yourself, and obviously then relationships in your personal space and your professional space. Starting off with the stress that I had experienced in my own world and not realizing how much it had impacted me. I had a very traumatic start to life at age 7 where my mom died, and the very stressful circumstances and situations. And then following on from that, another traumatic experience in my life was obviously sexual abuse as a child. And then through that, because of that, I had self-image and body conscious issues, and so tried my hand at binge eating and purging. And then realizing how our body, through obviously years of therapy, how our body stores trauma in various different ways, and as a result of that, unable to have a healthy relationship with myself, and then obviously in my personal space, healthy attachment, healthy relationships, and then obviously in the workplace as well. So yeah, and that's kind of where my passion comes in, and obviously constantly upskilling myself to be able to help people to make positive shifts in their life. So that's kind of where I come from. And yeah, today, as I said, for those that joined us a little bit late, today we wanted to be very interactive and engaging. So please feel free at any point if you have a question to either unmute yourself or raise your hand, or post your question in the chat box, and we will make sure that we cover that. We're also going to, at the end, have the last sort of 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So if you want to keep your question until then, we'll be answering questions at that stage as well. So yeah, we wanted to obviously make sure that you walk away with lots of value and some practical tools and tips on how to deal with stress. But Richard, this is, and especially now, it's quite a big buzzword that's being thrown around. It was such a common term, but I mean, so what is it really? I mean, what is stress for us?
Okay, so I mean, yeah, we're going to have to dip our toes into a little bit of theory here, but and probably the most widely accepted definition these days is comes from a guy called Richard Lazarus, and it talks about that we experience stress when events, situations, demands that are placed on us, when we perceive that they are greater than our ability to meet them. And again, there, I think the term or the word perceive or perception is absolutely critical in terms of being able to understand stress, because perception is such a very uniquely individual construct. How I perceive something is influenced by everything about me, who I am, my cultural background, my belief system, my value system, the skill set that I have, the experiences that I've had in my life. You know, all those biases and influences and experiences that we have influence how we perceive every single moment. And that rolls forward to stress. So what I might perceive as stressful, somebody else might not perceive it as stressful, even though it's the same situation. And that's okay. So that's the first thing, is to understand that it's okay. You know, we're not all exactly the same. And that's the wonderful thing about humanity, is that, you know, we're this huge melting pot of differences. So, for example, I don't know if you've seen this come up in your practice, Paula, in terms of households, relationships, husband and wives, whatever. Are you coming across people in those relationships who are experiencing, some are finding lockdown very stressful, and some are finding, it's not a problem at all. You know, I mean, it might sound weird because we all think it's so, perhaps we all think it's so terrible, but I'd imagine there are some fairly significant differences there.
Absolutely. Couples in general are not used to being together 24/7. We're kind of used to getting up and going to work and having some distance or some space between us, which helps us on one hand, give us a purpose and meaning, and on the other hand, our individuality in that we're doing our thing, and then we come home in the evenings and we come back together in terms of the family home and the family unit. And so, yes, being in each other's faces and spaces 24/7 has caused more stress and anxiety than before. People aren't used to it, didn't know how to deal with it and how to cope with it, because I just want some space, So that was on the one hand. And then on the other hand, obviously couples that don't have or didn't have a strong foundation or a strong relationship to begin with, now being forced to be in each other's spaces obviously brought all of those things to a head. And there was a lot of people dealing with conflict, or not knowing how to deal with the conflict because we couldn't escape to work. And I say that respectfully. Yeah. Some people do escape to go to work, to get away from it all. And then, yes, as you've seen in some of the stats from around the world, not just South Africa, but there has obviously been a spike in gender-based violence cases as well. So, yeah.
Okay. Those are some of the, the really sad sides and the sad side effects. But to overlay that, I want to climb onto one of my little hobby horses here. So one of the terms that's been bandied around, this is the new normal. Welcome to the new normal. And I kind of want to push against that, because part of that kind of says, okay, well, the world's changed, get used to it, off you go. And quite frankly, none of us are prepared for the situations we find ourselves in. Nothing in our lives, formally or informally, has prepared us for this. And again, one of the ways that we react or we interpret events around us as a stressor, or inducing stress in us, again, comes back from our own frame of reference. So what we are used to, what we understand as normal for us, and when we have things happening that are outside that norm, that fear of the unknown, that inability to control it, those kinds of things. So I know some people are trying to be helpful by saying, oh, this is the new normal, let's get used to it. And I've got a slightly different view to that. I actually don't think it's very helpful, because we're almost setting expectations for people that, well, how many months are we into this now? You should, this is the way it's going to go. You should be okay with this. Yeah, and for a lot of people, they're still going, I can't handle this. I don't like it. But everybody's telling me it's the new normal. It's not normal by any stretch of the imagination. It is not normal. And I do understand normal is a very loaded term. But in terms of just the fundamentals of who we are as creatures, our inability, even in this environment, in this, we're very fortunate to have the resources to be able to have these kinds of sessions, to, speak to family members on Zoom and what have you. Wonderful. That is a benefit. But even this is not normal in terms of how we as human beings are supposed to communicate. The inability to pick up the nuance of people's body language, the inability to touch appropriately, but to put a hand on someone's shoulder, to emphasize something, to give someone a hug appropriately. To not be able to do that is not normal. And I think one of the things we need to recognize is that, wow, this isn't normal. So I can cut myself a little bit of slack here because I'm feeling a little bit freaked out, as opposed to, well, everybody else seems to just be getting on with it in this new normal. There must be something wrong with me. No, there's nothing wrong with you. This is very, very difficult, and it's not something that we have the inherent skills to deal with.
Well, I'm glad to know that I'm normal then.
Oh, yeah, whatever that means, indeed. Indeed.
Because there are those days where, I feel I've got a grip on life and this new reality, and then there's other days where I do sometimes feel like I'm spinning backwards, and I know a lot of the people that are coming to see me are in exactly that. In fact, I had 2 clients this morning, exactly that same thing, feeling totally out of their depth, like a fish out of water, and how do we deal with it? And I think it also comes to, generally when change comes about, we have the option to buy into change. But COVID was thrust upon us. This new reality was thrust upon us. We weren't given a choice, so to speak. And we didn't have time to prepare for it. We went from one day to having all the freedom and movement and life to now all of a sudden being in lockdown, an extreme lockdown, not like some of the other countries around the world. And that in itself was hugely stressful. And then all the other things that have come with it. So yeah, absolutely. This whole new perception of this is the new normal and I need to kind of just get on with it and get over it and deal with it and move on. People are different, as you've said, and people cope differently. And so, you know, that whole perception reality thing that you were talking about, is there any truth in it? And how has this impacted us in terms of COVID and stress levels that we're feeling right now?
Yeah, so I mean, yes, there is. You know, that perception is reality, and I suppose that leads to one of the truisms that I'd like that people need to take away from today, and unfortunately, it's not managing stress doesn't come with a get out of jail free card like in Monopoly. At the end of the day, because it is a matter of perception. At the end of the day, it does fall back to ourselves to interpret what is happening with a realistic lens and to understand that at the end of the day, we are in control of how we choose to react to that. Now, I know those words come out of my mouth very easily, and it's a lot easier to say than it is to do. It's much easier to say, I'm stressed because of X, Y, Z, lockdown, the government, my wife, the whatever, you know, point fingers at everybody else. And it's not to say that those environmental factors and those instances don't generate a reaction in us. Absolutely they do. And it's completely normal to have a reaction. What isn't normal is to stay in that reactionary state. At the end of the day, we have to accept the responsibility that there are certain things that are within our control, and those we need to be focusing our good energies on. And there are a whole load of things that are outside of our control, and we have to, you know, I'm not going to say, you know, we've just got to let them go, but we've got to understand where we focus our energy, because it is a finite quantum we're talking about here. And stress is a cumulative effect. So, you know, before COVID-19, stress was already being called by, you know, the likes of the World Health Organization as the new plague of the 21st century. Bet they didn't use those words now, but anyhow. And the added situation that we found ourselves in has just exacerbated that. The other way I'd like to also think about, you know, maybe think about this later on tonight in terms of COVID. I think a lot of people are actually going through mourning. You know, there's a huge sense of loss. You know, you've lost some of your personal freedoms, a lot of your personal freedoms, you know, stuff that we just fundamentally take for granted, the ability to move around, the ability to do what we want when we want, those kinds of things that for many of us in societies that allow that, we have taken for granted. And that is a grieving process, which in itself comes with a lot of, you know, negative psychological and physiological effects. So I think the compounding of those together absolutely shows, and again, there are many research papers out there at the moment already that are talking about, you know, the rise specifically in anxiety and depression, and, you know, the general stress levels that people are feeling during this time. So I know that doesn't necessarily make your stress go away, but perhaps understanding again now in this new frame of reference that you are sharing this platform, this existence with a whole load of other people. It's not just you as an individual who's going through this alone. I know that doesn't necessarily make it any easier, but it perhaps gives you some sense of solidarity, that there are a lot of other people going through it. And there are a lot of people coming up with ways of coping and managing that. And that's, you know, what we need to get to and speak about now. I mean, just with the people that you're dealing with, you know, in terms of couples and family relationships, what are you seeing in terms of how people are supporting their partner during these times?
Yeah, I'm definitely coming across cases where the one partner kind of seems, well, business as usual, life carries on, and they've managed to adapt and kind of find their way, or that they are coping in terms of being more flexible and adaptable. And on the other hand, the other partner is really stressed and anxious with all the unknown elements, the unknown factors, because we've never been through this before. So we don't have a frame of reference in terms of how do we get through a pandemic and all these restrictions that have been placed on us. And so there's a lot of fear and anxiety around, well, what if I get exposed? I don't want to go back to work because I don't want to be in public places. What about my children or my elderly parents? And it's causing a bit of conflict in terms of the one partner saying, well, you know, just get over it. Like, you know, you're being ridiculous, or you're overreacting, or those kind of general comments that get made, which doesn't help the situation. It just makes it worse, because the other partner is not feeling heard, or that their feelings are being acknowledged, or their reality is being acknowledged. So yeah, I'm trying to work with, or finding that I need to work with them to kind of find a middle ground and go, okay, so yes, what can I do and focus on what I can control to reduce some of the anxiety, but that it's okay to feel anxious and scared and afraid and all these things. And on the other hand, how to be a little bit more empathetic and compassionate and understanding, because yes, we're in a relationship, but at the same time, we are two unique individuals and we have different perspectives and different realities, and that's okay. Neither one is right or wrong. It's how do we be supportive and be a better partner for each other in these tough times.
Yeah. So I think we start to hear to talk about, you know, another word that often comes hand in hand with stress, and that's resilience. You know, we can almost say, you know, the effects of stress are the sort of the antecedent to resilience. And if we think about how the additional pressures that are being placed on us, the additional fears of the unknown, couple that with a sense of loss and grieving that we're going through, it wears us down to a point where to have those empathic conversations with a partner, to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, meet people halfway, becomes that much more difficult, because we start to become so ground down that we're almost in this survival mode. And as we understand that what stress does to us over a period of time, you know, it's a neurological, endocrinological reaction that affects every single system in our bodies. Not only do we experience the physical symptoms, the tiredness, the aches and pains, the immune system suppression, all those kinds of things, but it impacts our cognitive abilities, our ability to think clearly. So all of a sudden we're in this very complicated situation. We worried about jobs, we worried about parents, spouses, all the things around us, and we want to figure out what we can do about it. But when our cognitive abilities are impaired, it becomes that much more difficult to think in a strategic and sort of logical fashion, which in itself can then reinforce that stress that you're feeling. You're thinking, well, my goodness, I can't think my way out of this. And then of course there's the emotional side to that as well, in terms of how one's emotions are regulated or less regulated now. So the outbursts of anger, and again in an enclosed environment, when we can get on each other's nerves and we're in each other's space all the time, you know, that can become very, very damaging. So I know this is a lot of kind of negativity we're speaking about now. And maybe I want to shift the conversation, if we can, if Paula, if you'll allow me to start moving a little bit towards some of the things we can start to do, because it can start to become very overwhelming. And you know, often when we're faced with things that seem overwhelming or we don't think we can achieve, we generally won't try, because we don't like failure in terms of how we've been socialized. So we need to understand that a lot of this is A, it is not normal, so that's okay. You don't have to feel okay about this. And yes, it is big, and yes, some of it is outside of our control, absolutely. And that doesn't make it okay, but there is a whole load of things we can do. And I'd like to kind of start going there, if that's all right.
Sure. I just want to do a check-in with people that are listening in and tuned in. Are there any specific questions or comments or just food for thought on what we've chatted about already that you maybe want to share? I see, Will, you've put your camera on. Is there something that you want to share with us?
No, I'm just going to say it's very insightful so far. So thank you. I've got nothing to add.
Thanks, Will. Anyone else with any other questions or food for thought for either one of us?
Okay, one thing I do want to just reassure everybody, I do understand that in these situations, we may be, the strangers, we don't necessarily want to post a question. We will Paula and I will put our details up at the end of it. If you feel free, send us an email. If there are questions in the chat that we don't get to, we will respond and we will get back to them. Okay, this is a big topic. It's a big, important topic. And I've been talking so much already that we've only got half an hour left. So, if you have something, hold on to it. You can either send personal emails to us or drop it in the chats. We will get back to you. All right. So nobody will leave here, hopefully with burning questions unanswered. Okay.
Some of the practical things. I mean, how do you know at what point is your, because people talk about positive stress and negative stress. So how do you know when stress is good or when stress is harmful? And then what are some of the practical things that you can start doing about it besides taking the stress test, of course, if you haven't already done it?
Well, I mean, that is one of the ways, and purely because often we need some objective external third party to actually sometimes look in and give us some objective feedback. One of the things as a creature, we're actually very adaptable. So we become used to a lot of the symptoms of stress. We kind of think it's they're stressful times. So, having a headache 3-4 times a week is kind of normal, being grumpy, not being able to sleep well. A lot of these things, we've kind of got used to them. And therefore we don't necessarily take heed of them as much as we should. The other reason that we need to, it's valuable to take something like the Vital Stress Survey is that a lot of the behaviors of people around us, because so many people are sitting at an elevated level of arousal and stress, that the way they are feeling mirrors the way you're feeling, so it almost becomes normalized. It's a normal way to be feeling. So you discount how you're feeling. So, that's one of the reasons why it is very important to take it, and answering those questions, as honestly as you can, is going to give you some objective insight into how things are working for you. Going back to your first part of the question there about the sort of the positive and the negative stress, and there's a whole load of fancy terms for them, and we've categorized stress into all sorts of lovely little boxes. Which is, as humans, we do that when we're faced with complex things, we break things down into smaller categories that we can understand. I think for the purposes of this discussion, positive and negative. So, I mean, for me, one of the easiest ways to recognize whether you're having some empowering positive stress is you can generally, because there are certain chemical reactions that happen. And one of the manifestations of a positive stress reaction is usually quite a sort of a warm, calm feeling almost in your chest. If you're watching pictures of kittens on the internet, and you go, oh, shame, isn't that cute? Those kinds of feelings. If you can cast your minds back to, when you hugged a loved one, how that made you feel, when you thought of a present for a loved one, for a birthday or an anniversary or whatever, and you knew that this was something that they were going to love, they were going to enjoy and appreciate, and the giving of that gift gives you this wonderful feeling that you're going to make somebody, another human being, happy. Those are kind of positive stress reactions. So it is important to recognize these, because clearly we want more of those if we can. You know, the negative ones, there are a whole load of things that we experience that we again need to tune into. We need to have that self-awareness. We need to raise our literacy around stress, that when our body is reacting in a certain way, it probably means, there's something I'm interpreting here, I'm perceiving, I'm over-interpreting this scenario to have a negative impact. So some of the things we've spoken about, you know, that whole what's out of our control, and COVID specifically has taken many things out of our control. And unfortunately or fortunately, some of the things that we can do are actually in our control. They're not terribly sort of sexy, or, you know, fireworks go off and it's this flash of inspiration that nobody's ever heard of before. And it's this sort of secret clickbait video that, you know, is on YouTube. You know, here's the one secret to beating stress. It doesn't work like that. It's far more prosaic and quite boring, but it's something that is in our control and can absolutely start to help. So there are certain physiological things that we can do that counteract the effects of stress. And some of them are very simply is breathing. So just knowing how to breathe properly when you are feeling stressed. There is a proper way to breathe, and it's really about learning to take slow, deep breaths. Again, in the interests of time here, I'm not going to go through it. Maybe what we'll do is we'll send out just a link to a video that people can go and see on how to do it. But again, there are some very instantaneous things we can do that can lower blood pressure, lower heart rate, lower cortisol levels, so that we can actually just take the sharp edges off the stress and anxieties as they are unfolding. We have to recognize that it's happening, though, and we have to be cognitive of that. So that's why it's important to be aware of how you're feeling and how you're thinking. And then some of the other very simple things, you know, you've really got to be focusing on, I call it the mechanics. You know, you've got to be looking at, you know, your sleep patterns, your what you're eating. Are you getting some exercise? I know that's really boring. You know, it's as I said, it's not very sexy. But you know yourselves, if you've had a very poor night's sleep, you know, you're not the sharpest tack in the box the next day. You know, possibly more short-tempered. You know, it's not rocket science. But what we have to do is we have to put the effort into protecting those things that we do have some control over. So again, you know, understanding our routines have changed, and sleep and eat and exercise form part of those routines. So we need to start getting back into good, healthy habits around those things. Just because maybe you don't have to sit in traffic for an hour in the morning, you know, you can lie in bed later. So that means you can go to bed much later, maybe have a cup of coffee a bit later than you usually would, etc., etc. Start understanding that maybe there's a better way that you could use that time. Sorry, is somebody wanting to say something?
So we've got a question from Meryl. She says, when engaging and talking about stress, especially during this period, I'm trying to communicate positive solutions or outcomes and resiliency and ways of coping, but being very mindful and conscious of toxic positivity, as this can also be harmful. As you said, talking about the new normal reinforces further stress or burnout. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great, you know, that's a really great point, Meryl, because it is about acknowledging that this is difficult, this is hard. And it isn't about, you know, just do these 3 things and skip through fields of daisies and everything's going to be okay. And what is easy for me is not necessarily easy for somebody else. So, you know, that toxic positivity is an absolute realistic thing. And I think in terms of the communication, you know, if you have enough empathic resources left yourself to be able to have those conversations, it's to be, you know, it's to follow the kind of standard kind of counseling interaction where we affirm and acknowledge the way somebody else is feeling. And we acknowledge that the situation is not as easy as just 1, 2, 3 and it'll go away. You know, be as realistic and supportive about it as possible, and then understand what and try to help that person come to specific actions that they can engage in. So, and as I said, you know, that's different for everybody. You know, a lot of people I know when all the gyms were closed, so they go, "Oh, that's great. You know, I'm supposed to exercise now and to contain my stress, but you know, the gym's closed. What am I supposed to do?" Well, you know, there are a lot of other ways of exercising, and that's not to criticize those people, but that's their frame of reference. Their frame of reference is, well, exercise to me means going and, you know, seeing my personal trainer twice a week and following the circuit at the gym and doing this and that, and I can't do that anymore, so I'm lost. So often it's about bouncing ideas off other people, and again, that's why it is so important to be able to have the relationships to talk to other people, because what we often can't see, the wood in front of our own eyes, the trees, somebody else can give us some different ideas. And it isn't about fobbing people off. It isn't about saying, well, just do this, this, and this, and you know, you'll be fine. No, you know, acknowledge it. This is a terrifying, very different, very extraordinary situation that we're in.
Yeah, and I'm finding that some of the tools may work for me today, but tomorrow those tools don't work for me for whatever reasons, because they're just not effective in that moment, or with that stress or that whatever. And so I think it's understanding what works for you and having a number of tools in your toolbox to help you cope and deal. And I'm seeing this come out in relationships, both personal and professional, because I obviously do quite a bit of employee wellness and well-being and, you know, those kind of things. And so to really simplify it, and I am simplifying this, but that if you think of emotions as energy, and when you're stagnant, so when you're not doing something, the energy becomes stagnant. And if we want to shift the energy, then we have to move, and which is why exercise is always put down as one of the tools from a mental health and a positive mindset and those kind of things. So if you can't exercise, just even simply getting up and moving from one room to the next, shifting that energy can also just help shift the perspective. You know, that cliche about a change of environment. But also when it comes to relationships, is understanding that everybody has that different perspective and a different reality. And how can you just hold the space, whether it's for your partner or your children or family members or colleagues in the workplace? Because as you said, we're all going through this at the same time, but we're going through it differently and we're experiencing it differently and our realities are different. So yeah, it's how can we be more supportive to each other, but at the same time, starting with self, taking care of self, because you can't take care of others if you're not taking care of yourself.
Absolutely. Genevieve's posted a very interesting point. I will get to it in a second. I just want to tap onto what you've just said there in terms of you know, changing the energy by changing the space and those kinds of things. If we drop back into something, you know, the foundations of things like cognitive psychology, the field of cognitive psychology talks about how we think affects our perceptions and our moods and ultimately our behaviors. And you know, there is a corollary to that as well, as to say, you know, our actions can influence how we feel and how we think about things as well. And no, it is not as simple as to say, well, okay, I want to be positive, so I'm going to go and run around the block. And it, you know, it's not necessarily 1 + 1 = that, but there is definitely a causal relationship between what we do physically in terms of how we spend our time and fundamentally how that makes us feel about ourselves. And you mentioned such a very good point there about so being able to understand how we're feeling is not just the physical side. It's also about the thoughts that we're having, you know, the kind of internal dialogue, and how negative that can be. And maybe that's, I can now introduce, I'll read out Genevieve's point here. She recently attended a webinar about humor, and they said that getting people to laugh can help with stress and improve mood. So a suggestion she took from that is to get people laughing, which can be as simple as asking them to think about what makes them laugh and recall something funny. I mean, I absolutely love that. Now, when I was growing up, my parents subscribed to the Reader's Digest, and I used to love these books. And then they built up a life because they all came in these wonderful fake leather covers, and you got like a green series, and then you got a maroon series, and they look great. And there was always this little series in there. It was called Laughter, the Best Medicine. And there were all these little funny little anecdotes about farm animals and all sorts of different things. And so absolutely, you know, we know that humor is very positive. We know the actual act of laughing. We know the act of smiling is very good for us. But I really love the point you make there about asking someone to recall something. Because again, and I've learned this the hard way, what I find funny, others can find offensive. Yeah. So asking someone else to, because, you know, it's so, humor is so bound up in our culture and bound up in who we are in terms of, again, our frame of reference. So asking someone to be able to visualize something that has made them laugh, I think is a very, very powerful thing. And again, you know, it's not necessarily something you can do like this, but it's something that you can introduce into conversations. I mean, one of the things we do, we recently, a friend of ours recently lost his wife to cancer. So we've been having webinars once a week at least, where we try and offer some support and those kinds of things. And excuse me, being able to recall situations from our childhoods, you know, when we went to a fancy dress party and you know, I was dressed as a lady and we had to stop at a petrol station on the way home to get petrol, and, you know, so little things like that can just do exactly, I think, what Genevieve said. And yes, it takes a little bit of effort. You've got to set up the webinar, you've got to get your friends together, but those little things can have such a profound impact, not only at that point in time, but afterwards as well. But it's about putting the effort in, and it's about not seeing stress management in all its little facets as some kind of fad diet, you know, just eat avocados for 5 days and you'll lose 10 kilos. It's got to become, it's a way of life, because, you know, the circumstances around you are not magically going to go away after 5 days either. And I think that staying power is really critical.
Yeah, and I'm seeing this with a lot of the couples that are, you know, just how some of them are struggling during these times. Because generally what tends to happen is we in times of stress, we turn away from our partners, we turn away from each other instead of turning towards each other, because our partners in our relationships should be our biggest source of support, and being there and being able to rely and depend on each other. And so really helping couples to have the conversations, or creating a safe enough space between them to have conversations where they can talk about what I'm feeling and what I'm needing and how I'm expecting or wanting or needing you to be there for me. Because we often assume that our partners are mind readers and that they know what we want or what we're thinking. But if we don't voice it and share it, the space is left open to assumptions and presumptions, and often projections as well. We project our stuff on our partners, or the other person for that matter, in the workplace. So it's around helping them create that safe space where we can talk about these things. And then how do I need to be there for you as a partner? How can I support you? and help me to help you. Because if I don't know how to help you, I don't know how to be there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you know, that's from an intellectual perspective, that's not a difficult thing to understand. It's not always as easy to put it into practice, and it is about practice, and it's about reiterating that. And I think that is a very valuable point about how COVID has changed that dynamic, that because many of us are in the same space 24 hours a day, you know, our bedrooms have become our offices, and you know, so we're so close all the time, but we're actually not communicating, perhaps even as well as we used to. When we knew we had less time together, you know, we used it more effectively. And so I think that's something that's very important, because again, the nature of our human social construct is that we need the interaction with other human beings to thrive. I mean, our greatest moments of ecstasy occur with another human being, and the opposite to that is also true. So it's fundamentally changed how we interact with people, but we have to make that effort.
And that reminds me of that research that I was reading, or the studies that have been done on the loneliness epidemic, which was actually around before COVID came around, and it was quite a big worldwide study that's been done in the US, the UK, Australia at the time, where the impact of chronic loneliness on our immune system is the equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Yeah. So again, I mean, people who find themselves isolated, you know, because they aren't in a relationship, they don't have family around them. I think it's even more important to be able to reach out and for other people to reach out to them. So if you know somebody, and we all know that helping another human being is one of the best things we can do for ourselves. It's very healthy for ourselves. It's like this really extraordinarily brilliant survival mechanism that we actually get benefit when we help other people. But the ability to do that, to reach out, if you are in an isolated situation and you don't feel that you have people that you can set up a Friday afternoon webinar with, and you know, have a cup of tea and a slice of cake or a drink or whatever you want to do, you know, there are organizations you can contact. You know, there are online support groups you can reach out to. I've recently joined a mental health group, a global mental health group, and it's via WhatsApp. So it's really, I mean, I don't sort of go there for personal counseling or anything. It's more of a sort of a work-related group. But just the kinds of interactions you have from people around the world, there is comfort in that, and there is also new ideas that come out of that when you understand what people are doing in different parts of the world. They're experiencing things slightly differently or exactly the same, and what they're doing about it. And you know, there are many groups like that around, and I think it is important that we need to have some, you know, foster new types of connections while we can.
So I know we've got a few minutes left, so I just want to open it up to our people that have listened in or tuned in terms of, are there any specific questions you have or general comments that you have that you'd like to share or ask? Please feel free to put your hand up or unmute yourself or type it in the chat box, and we'll be happy to answer it for you.
If I share the screen now, Paula, will the chat box disappear?
No, it won't.
Okay, all right. So I'm gonna, while we're talking and you're thinking of things, I'm just gonna put up our details so that, again, we don't run out of time and you haven't got our details if you want to ask us something or send us something. But I maybe wanted to also talk a little bit about anxiety. I know one of the people who dialed in asked about that at the beginning of the session. And yes, absolutely, there's hoping that has shared.
Sure, yeah, it has. So
Okay, great.
can you share some daily coping methods is one of the questions. Yeah, absolutely. So as we've been saying, everybody is different, and different things work for different people. So some of the things that you can do is starting from the basics, like Richard mentioned earlier. So breathing, focusing on breathing, meditation, music, movement, whether it's going for walks or whether it's doing actual exercise like running or exercise, online exercise classes. Support structures in terms of reaching out to people when you really are feeling like you're not coping, being aware of your sleeping patterns and your diet and some of the negative coping mechanisms that we potentially turn to without realizing. So obviously things like alcohol, smoking, medication, also emotional eating. Snacking is a big thing that's coming up now. A lot of people, because it's easy to get up and walk to the cupboard in the fridge, as opposed to when we were in the office, we couldn't do that. Those are some of the other things. Journaling as well, writing down what you're feeling about your emotions, having some digital detox, being aware of what you're consuming in terms of social media and news and the negativity or the noise from that side. Having some time out for yourself. So if you are stuck at home working with your spouse or partners or family members, have a dedicated space that everybody knows when I go to that space or that corner or that room that I just need some time out. I need some time to be with me. And whether it's putting earphones on or closing the door or going and sitting in the bottom of the garden, that kind of thing. And yes, absolutely, being a workaholic can be a negative coping mechanism because it keeps us busy. And when we're busy and when we're in our heads, we're not in our hearts or our bodies, so to speak, and we numb ourselves to our feelings and our emotions or what's going on inside of us. We suppress it. So those are some of the sort of the red flags to look out for. Richard, I'm sure you've got more to add.
Yeah, I mean, you've summarized it really, really well. One thing I wanted to add is have some fun. And I'm not trying to be flippant, but yes, the world, there is a lot of negativity in the world right now. There are a lot of people who are worse off than you. Flagellating yourself with guilt around that is not going to improve your ability to manage those stresses. So, I always put the caveat, do something that you enjoy as long as it's not illegal or immoral. But there is nothing wrong with immersing yourself in a joyous activity, something that gives you personal sense of achievement, joy, happiness, just for the sake of doing it, not necessarily expecting any other outcome out of it. And I think, just certainly speaking with a lot of my own friends, because the traditional way that they have spent their leisure time, sought sense of joy in their lives has been interrupted, they actually don't know how to find it. So it's been a journey of discovery for some of them, and it's been a journey of stagnation for others. So, use the time that you can't do what you used to do to maybe discover new things that do give you a sense of joy. And again, these can be very, very simple things. It's a really silly example. One thing we did is we started making a mosaic. I was cleaning out the garage because I had the time to do it, and it's been on the to-do list for about 4 years. And there were a whole load of tiles from various projects. And, we took great delight as a family, my younger son mostly, smashing them up carefully, coming up with some kind of diagram, and sticking bits of broken tile onto an old piece of plywood. It is not really going to be good enough to hang anywhere other than in the garage. But that's not, that was not the point. The point was there were times that we could sit together as a family and sort through things and, stick some bits on. Didn't have to be long and protracted. There were times that one of us would just go and do something. So I know that's a really sort of banal, prosaic kind of example, but there are so many of those things around us if we just choose to expand our view. So some of the time you're maybe online is maybe, look for some of those kinds of things as opposed to, you know, drip feeding the negativity from news sites into you all day long.
And I think it's also being honest with yourself and that it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
There's so much pressure or perception or society pressure that, you know, we need to get on with it and get over it and be okay. You know, social media doesn't help either. So it's okay to not be okay. And on those days, it's okay to put your hand up and say, you know what, I'm not okay today. I'm not having a good day. It doesn't make you any less of a human being or a bad person or weak or anything along those lines. And in fact, it takes a very brave and courageous person to put their hand up and say, today I'm not okay, or today I'm not coping. So be gentle and kind to yourself. This is where the self-care and the self-love comes in. And then the other thing is putting down boundaries. Being able to say no in terms of, I'm ending my work day today at 5 o'clock. I'm switching off and I'm downtime for me. It's okay to put those boundaries in place. And in fact, it's important and it's essential. So look at boundaries. I'm just catching up on the chats. I see.
No, me too.
I'm currently working 14 hours a day in COVID duty and a few other work. I'm not depressed, but I do feel agitated and irritated. Absolutely. And it's okay to feel those things. And I think potentially look at what's under the source of the agitation or the irritation. Can you pinpoint it? And then can you try and do something about those things in terms of managing it or reducing it or eliminating it, whichever is easiest. And then Christine says we had corona rules to keep a sense of normality. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Can I just jump in on that quickly? I know the time has expired. Absolutely. That, you know, we take a sense of comfort and familiarity from things when we're not surprised by them. So a routine, to a degree, can give us a sense of familiarity and comfort and safety. So I'm not saying, you know, you've got to be as strict about your routines, but one thing we certainly try to do is we try not to let Fridays blend into Saturdays and Sundays. You know, our frame of reference is very much weekends are different from a 5-day work week. So, you know, we absolutely draw the lines in terms of work on a weekend when it's possible. Crises do arise, but we try not to let those boundaries blend. When our children were doing online schooling, they got dressed into their uniforms every day. You know, for some people, I know that's crazy, but for them, it kind of put them in the frame of mind. Okay, I'm going to school now, and that's what I'm doing, and that worked for us. Might not work for everybody. So yeah. I absolutely, the corona rules, love it.
Thanks.
The courses, Christine signing up for courses.
Any last minute questions, comments? We have recorded the session. We will send out the link with the recording to you all again. We will send out our contact details as well as some little other sort of coping mechanisms or tools that you can potentially tap into and use, as well as the link to the stress test. Again, if you haven't done it, feel free to take the stress test. It also has some tools and some coping mechanisms that you can use as well. So yeah, before we close off,
and again, just I think the last thing from my side, because we are trying to gather as much data as we possibly can from around the world, you know, if you feel comfortable sharing the Vitals survey with your friends, your networks, please do so. It is completely confidential. None of us will, you know, myself or Paula will know who you are. It takes 5 minutes. It's free. That would just be really helpful for us as well in terms of trying to gather some more data so that we can do the analysis and then hopefully come up with some more practical recommendations. Great.
Awesome. Any last minute questions from anybody?
Wonderful.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for giving up your lunch hour for us. I hope it has been insightful and helpful for you. And yeah, we will be looking at having some more up and coming webinars around stress or stress related topics and we will keep you posted of all the details.